two before the one. Wisdom is water, I'm the daughter of the cannon fodder. Applied knowledge and insight, a born scholar. Look like a martyr to marauders like Tartar. Wise owl slaughter, whack MCs order applauder. Original woman, decipher the womb. Crown of creation, fruit of the planet, earth and the moon.
Peace, peace, peace. Welcome to another episode of Wise the Dome. Today we have a very special guest, man. He's a friend of the show. You've seen him on here a few times. You've seen him on his own show, the Brother Diallo show. You've seen him on Black Power Media as well. Great thinker, man. Always a pleasure to have him on. Brother Diallo, thank you for coming through.
Anytime. Very happy to be here.
How you been, man? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. It's a solemn day, King Day, but we trudge through.
Right, right. That's what I kind of wanted to start with that. It's whenever we think of Dr. King and also the holiday to commemorate him, we have obviously capitalist corporations that use his image to sell products. We have the "I Have a Dream" speech played over and over and over, and then a lot of the things and the ideas that Dr. King wrote about and was contemplating towards the end of his life doesn't seem like the same Dr. King that America likes to portray. Like even today, it's funny how they use his name, like Ted Cruz and all of these other like right-wing fascists, quoting him about things, making America great and all of these things. But whatever you think of Dr. King, I know that's a pretty broad question. You can take it wherever. But whenever you think of Dr. King, yeah, go ahead.
No, go on. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, like, what comes to your mind as far as who he was in his totality?
My main thing is, I think that King was evolving. I think King was transitioning from being a progressive to a revolutionary. He was younger than I am now when he was assassinated. And I think the reason he was assassinated is because they wanted to stifle the evolution, because King was basically at the beginning of his career, more or less controlled opposition to prevent or to overshadow the more radical calls for Black power and Black liberation. Malcolm X was very clear on message to the grassroots. There was a bottom-up grassroots Black revolutionary ideology developing, and struggles and movements in pockets of America that were syncing up with the struggles in the Caribbean, struggles in Latin America, decolonial struggles in Africa. And so they decided they wanted a top-down. So they basically wanted polish. They decide who they're going to not necessarily go to him as a deliberate or direct conspiracy, but the media can pick and choose because of the strength of the corporate media and the state itself to give attention to or determine who. You see a lot of leading Blacks today. Some show up on MSNBC, some Blacks show up on Fox News, some Blacks show up on liberal outlets like Democracy Now!, Ta-Nehisi Coates and people of that nature. They aren't necessarily the most articulate. They're not even people who have that much influence over the Black community, but white people have always reserved for themselves the ability to determine who is the voice of the generation, not just in the arts, but in politics, in religion. So anyway, coming out of all that, Dr. King was very malleable. Dr. King's tactics were more acceptable to the oppressor. Dr. King's outlook and his goals were more acceptable. He was limited his movements to social reforms, political reforms. He didn't touch on politics. He didn't touch on international issues. He did not advocate for self-defense. for arming. And so all those things to say, but if you follow Dr. King's writings and his public thoughts and his alliances that he was cultivating, it was clear that Dr. King saw the error of his ways, and he also saw that the system had no intention of really making good on its deal, on its side of the bargain, in terms of if Black people can demonstrate the ability to endure and suffer peacefully, then they will give us concessions as soon as the time is right. The long story short is they had given King the Nobel Peace Prize. They had set him down in front of presidents, and he had the audience of presidents. They had made his organization, many of the funders at the time, DuPont and Cargill, many of the big funders and liberal funders and philanthropists at that time. So they had created King, and King, like W.E.B. Du Bois of his era, went off script, went off the, as we would say, went off the reservation. And for that reason, I think that's why he was an evolving revolutionary. And then I would say that the King that they resurrected was not the King that they assassinated. So King was rebranded after and King was not very popular at the time of his death. He had a lot, and many people, especially prominent Negroes, Bill Cosby's, and very prominent Negroes who are from that era in their 80s and some in their 90s and late 70s, they didn't stand or walk with King. And now they say his name at every opportunity.
Right.
So Dr. King was resurrected to be with the rhetoric that his dream was fulfilled, that his dream did not extend beyond desegregating buses, desegregating lunch counters, and having little white boys and little Black boys and little white girls and little Black girls walk hand in hand. School desegregation, Black people getting into prominent positions within the system, elected to public office, high-ranking positions within multinational corporations, Black entrepreneurship, and so they just totally, confined King's message from justice to a message of human rights and justice to a message of opportunity and integration.
Right.
So King has been distorted. King is owned now. He has a national holiday in the United States. He's the museums from Tennessee where they murdered him to the state capitol. He's one of the few people who has a prominent monument on the Capitol, right up there with Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. So King is now owned, a wholly owned tool, a weaponized tool of the state at this point. And you have right-wing conservatives who call his name. You have overt racists who claim to be acting in the spirit of King when they impose racist policies. You have Uncle Tom sellouts who wouldn't have marched with King, who used King as a bludgeon to beat poor and struggling Black people over the head, telling us that our behaviors are inconsistent with what King has wanted, as if we're obligated to live our lives according to what Dr. King wanted.
Right.
So King is a complex figure. I do have respect. I do think that he was evolving. I think that's what I admire most about Dr. King and Malcolm X, their ability and willingness to evolve when they are introduced to new insights, new understanding. When circumstances begin to change or advance or regress, they're willing and capable of adjusting their stances, as opposed to many of these leading Blacks today. They are hardened fundamentalists. They're really reactionaries. They get a line and they stick to that line, and they have pride in saying, well, this is what I believe in, that, and I don't. So but Dr. King was an academic. He was a researcher. He was a learned man. Malcolm X was an academic. I believe if King was not thwarted and assassinated and murdered by the state, I do believe that he would have more and more aligned with Kwame Ture. Kwame Ture, for many years, talked about personal conversations he had with King. And Kwame Ture was literally radicalizing King. And radicalizing doesn't mean that King was going to come out with a beret, a leather jacket, and a machine gun. Radicalizing means that King was going to have a more grounded and fundamental understanding of the world and his people's position in it, and begin to speak to not just the symptoms of racism or the superficial manifestations of the racism, but begin to identify the core of the racism and propose solutions that attack the core of racism, white hegemony, and capitalism. So
That's
he's a complex figure, but I do respect him as one of our ancestors. And I do think it's tragic that America has been able to wrap the flag around King and have this zombie, I'm all about love and peace, Dr. King.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's kind of why I wanted to have you on, and just to, because I knew you'd give a great and profound answer on that. But it's, you look at some of Dr. King's works and about his criticism on capitalism and, having socialist ideas. It makes me think that, like when we think about Du Bois, and we had the talented 10th idea, and then later on, due to the fact that he was able to evolve because he was not assassinated, he became more Pan-African and communist, right? Do you think that if King would have never been assassinated, that his idea of justice would be more and more focused on how exploitative capitalism is, and became a full-out socialist?
Yeah, we know that for an absolute fact. In fact, throughout King's career, he was accused of being a communist infiltrator, or what they called back then a fifth columnist. At that era, the United States was involved in a Cold War, or a war of attrition, with the Soviet Union, which was a conglomerate of several communist states in Eastern Europe. And there was also communist uprising, communist and social guerrilla movements in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and on the African continent. And Dr. King, and what was told back then, what many Black people were told back then, is that Black people should stay loyal to America. And once the threat of communism is defeated, then we can discuss it. So Black people were always told after the Civil War, oh, we have to mend the nation. So we're going to let this bring the South back in. So we had to wait while they mended the nation together. And then came shortly after that, and shortly after Reconstruction, there were economic collapses. There were Great Depressions long back in 1820 and the 1860s. There was financial instability, of course. Then came World War I, and they had to defeat the Huns, or defeat the European conglomerates or empires. Then World War II. So they were always telling Black people, just when we turn this corner. I mean, in fact, they're even making promises like that now to Black people. Once we turn this corner, at that time with Dr. King was evolving, he was always accused of being a communist. And there was this old flyer that the KKK and the White Citizens Council had put up billboards showing Dr. King in a meeting where it's him and all surrounded by white people. And they were like, this is photo evidence of Dr. King at a young communist meeting.
Wow.
And you recall back during the Hillary Clinton's run for presidency against Donald Trump, anytime a Black person would say, I don't like Hillary, I don't have no intention on voting for Hillary, they would accuse you of being a Russian bot.
Wow. Yeah, I do remember that. But I never related that to the same thing as what they would.
They've always, whenever Black people don't toe the line of the people who believe they own us, it's either because we're insane or because we're being controlled by external forces. Right. And when they don't have an external force like the Soviet Union or the Russian government, or they'll say demonic forces have overtaken us, so they can never imagine Black people being internally driven and motivated for rebellion, or rebelling in ways that are not pre-approved by our oppressor. So King was always called a communist. He was called a communist sympathizer. He was called Pinko back then. And Pinko was someone who isn't a communist. So you got red, the communists were red. But when you dilute red, it starts to turn pink.
Right.
So a communist sympathizer or someone who has communist leanings. So it was it's funny that the right wing today talks about cancel culture. when there's never been more cancellation than during what was called the McCarthy era. And the if you were just walking with a pamphlet in your pocket, you could lose your job, your community, if you just had a socialist workers pamphlet. So anyway, King, his entire career was accused of being a secret communist, a closeted communist. So when King finally came out and says, well, I'm going to work with the poor people's movement, when King started to identify the class divisions and started understanding what good is social rights if you don't have economic mobility, if you don't have economic justice, and Black people and the state doesn't atone for generations of economic repression. We weren't just racially repressed, politically repressed, we were economically repressed. So when he started, that's when a lot of his enemies and detractors say, we knew it. We told y'all, we warned America that he was a no good communist. Y'all didn't believe us. Y'all thought he was a good Christian man. He's a bad Christian, and even Black Christians. And then he came out against the Vietnam War. Right. And who were they fighting? And there was this concept called the domino effect. They said, if you let one nation fall to communism, then the next nation, and then we'll all be communists. And so then he came out sympathetic, calling out the atrocities of the Vietnam War, calling out the injustices of the Vietnam War, and the Viet Cong was communist.
Right.
So King, whether he ever said he was a communist or not, his entire life was accused of being communist. And then he started advocating for labor unions and labor rights, for economic justice, for the just redistribution of wealth, for proper oversight and taxation of the elites. So I do conclude that Dr. King was a socialist. He advocated for socialist reforms. So he wasn't necessarily a full-blown, he would be more in line with Bernie Sanders. Mm-hmm. He supported redistributive policies and wealth and limitations of putting a ceiling on the economy. He wasn't necessarily a socialist because he did not call for the abolition of private property. He did not call for the revoking of corporate charters and the dismantling of corporations, but anti-war, anti-imperialism. But I do think that King was becoming more radical. So if he hadn't been murdered, I think the federal government, the FBI, agrees with me that he would have gone full socialist, if not full communist. Just like you mentioned, W.B. Du Bois went from being a capitalist and a patriotic American to being a full-blown communist.
Right.
So, yeah. So that was King's trajectory. That's where he was going if he hadn't been shot down. My assessment.
I totally agree.
And I'm going strictly off of his words,
right?
The policies he supported, the alliances he started to build and forge.
No, definitely. The evidence is there. And, there's even a book. I know you probably read it, Radical King. But if you look at some of his own writings and his own books, like you said before, like he kind of laying it out there, he's saying it without saying it in a lot of cases.
And also, it's hard to be fully, and also maybe I would say ultimately he might have been a liberation theologist. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably as far as he would have went. But yeah, I think if they hadn't assassinated King and he'd been allowed his natural development and evolution intellectually and ideologically, he would have been much further left than he was.
Right, indeed. And you kind of mentioned something about, of the rebranding of King. And nowadays we have, like you said, people like Ta-Nehisi Coates that are, propped up on these shows. And I don't know if you saw it the other day, but I saw it was a discussion. It was like 10 minutes long from what I saw, but it might have been longer. But it was Mark Lamont Hill and Michael Eric Dyson. And they were pretty much saying the conversation was so elitist to me, right? If you don't have a PhD, then how dare you debate us? But really, what happens is they don't have the pulse of the people, and they start debating people online, and they start getting cooked. That's how I see it in a lot of cases, right? But Michael Eric Dyson was like, I pretty much got the vibe and the idea from what he was saying, that him and Mark Lamont Hill, that they feel like they've gotten this far in the world of academia, but they are losing they're losing any type of, what's the word I'm looking for? Any type of like they don't have the people anymore. They're losing any type of hold that they had or influence that they had. That's what I was. Any type of influence that they had on the people. What's your thoughts on that, man?
I don't think Michael Eric Dyson ever really had an organic relationship. He's definitely didn't come from the bottom up. He came from the top down. I don't really fault him for that, because to me, it's a quality over quantity issue when it comes to analysis, understanding our situation, articulating solutions. To me, I don't really measure your value by how many people agree with you or how many people follow you, but the quality, depth, and accuracy of your analysis, data, and conclusion. Michael Eric Dyson is right to say that, well, he didn't say this, but to suggest that revolution is an intellectual endeavor above everything else. If your analysis, if your conclusions and understandings, if your assessments are inaccurate, if they are wrong, then any actions you take can have led people to further entrench their oppression. But revolution being an intellectual endeavor, then you have to say, well, what is intellectualism? And where is it found? So in most educational institutions in the United States, you find more indoctrination,
right,
than education. Oh, it's my son out there. You find just hearing some scratching. I think my neighbor's dog is out is out in the hallway. Anyway, it's in terms of intellectualism. Does intellectualism come? Well, let me back up. Dr. Bobby Wright said the word educate means to bring out. And Dr. Bobby Wright said that the institutions of our oppressors cannot educate African people. So we receive education from our community.
Right.
But when we go to their institutions, we receive training on how to use or adapt or reform tools. You learn techniques, you learn methods, and you gain access. But if you do not have a Pan-African or radical or revolutionary ideology, mindset, goal, it doesn't matter how gifted your hands are. You get in front of the world and look like a goddamn buffoon.
Ben Carson.
Even you could be right. You can be an inarticulate idiot, but yet you know how to carry out the actions of some of the most intricate action. That is a person who is highly trained in how to utilize tools and carry out operations, but they're not well educated in how to think and process. So we can train up the greatest Black doctors in the world, but Black people as a race, as a community, have the worst health outcomes.
Right.
Have the worst outcomes. We can train up the most fearless fighters in the world, Harlem Hellfighters. Some of the greatest pilots. There's this new propaganda movie coming out about the first Black fighter pilot in the U.S. military.
I didn't see the movie, I saw the trailer.
Right. And you know, Obama's a magnificent administrator. He's a magnet. I'm not anti-bureaucracy. Everybody, I hate bureaucracy. I'm not anti-bureaucracy. I have a great appreciation for statecraft, administration, and management. And Obama is great at it. But a man who identifies as Black, how can he literally repair and resecure the state of his oppressor? At the same time, he oversaw not just the crumbling and the further disintegration of the Black community, but went and destabilized entire regions of the Horn of Africa, North Africa, or left in economic and political stagnation, sub-Saharan Africa, Haiti, you know? So just having the intellectual side, just having the training or formal education means nothing to Black liberation, Black empowerment, Black upliftment if you don't have the true education, meaning coming from within. If you go to school without an agenda, if we sending Black kids off to universities without their own agenda.
Right.
So their agendas is implanted in their brain.
Right.
And we celebrate it when they come out, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Where did they get that from? We're going to study STEM. Where does that come from? What agendas come from us? So all that to say, we can't allow people like Dyson or Coates or Mark Lamont Hill to turn us off to academia, to turn us off to discourse, turn us away from intellectualizing. I ain't with all that talk. I ain't with it. And I just see people every day. I go online, see black people. I'm about action.
Yeah.
What's directing that action?
Right.
What's coordinating that action?
Right.
What's determining whether or not that action will be effective or won't be effective? And what will you do if the actions does not give you the outcome? How do you go about transforming that action so that the action feeds into the outcome that you seek? All of that is intellectual, mental work.
Right.
So there has to be a marriage between the action and the emotion and the rage and the drive to the critical thinking, analysis, data collection, data dissemination, articulating what we do and why we do it to our people and amongst our people. There has to be a marriage of that. So revolution is an intellectual endeavor, but just because someone's engaged in intellectual activity and they're black doesn't mean they're using their intellect on our behalf.
Right.
Some people, black people, highly educated black people, try to use their intellect not to resist the systems and institutions of white domination, not to dismantle capitalism and the capitalist, but they use their brain power on how to pacify black people. They use their intellect to pacify. They use their intellect to confuse.
Right.
They use their intellect to further confuse, or what they call obfuscate, cloud issues, by making shit that is very complex seem simple and making things that are relatively simple, putting all these layers of complexity on there. And how do you know who's who? How do you determine? Someone stands up, Dr. Umar, I'm the Prince of Pan-Africanism. How do you conclude, yes, he is the Prince of Pan-Africanism and he's acting on behalf of us and we should follow and agree because he says a lot of things that sound very enlightening and attractive? How do we determine whether or not we should embrace that or reject it? Even the people we like. Right. So it is an intellectual endeavor, but you don't need a formal education to engage in intellectual endeavors. You don't need a formal education. It is very valuable. If you're in a position you have the opportunity to secure one. There is a lot of value to be extracted from formal education institution, but there's also a lot of value to be attracted from lived experience. But you can go through hell or you can go through very enriching lived experience, or you can go through very enriching formal education. But if your ideology is not grounded, it's what difference does it make? What does it matter? Whether your education came from the university or college system, or your education came from the streets or the community.
And I have no doubt that online they probably do converse with a lot of people with some far out type of, because it's some crazy people out there, but at the same time the elitism just rubs me the wrong way, because it makes me think about, like you mentioned, brothers like Malcolm, who I would say was an intellectual, Fred Hampton, and it's like, would you have this same type of, well, y'all guys don't have these PhDs, and of course they wouldn't. They couldn't do that publicly, because the Black community would shun them for it. But it's just, whatever what it sounds like? It sounds like some W.E.B. Du Bois talented 10th shit before he evolved into what he became. Like, do you see any similarities with some of these academics thinking that, hey, we are the talented 10th and we are going to be the ones to lead us to liberation?
They're not even that. They're worse than that. I think the talented 10th, I agree with Du Bois. It was short-sighted. It was incorrect, and he was right to abandon it. But they're not even that, because remember, what did he want the talented 10th to do? What was the specific mission and goal of the talented 10th? So a lot of times, if you look at these Negroes that talk about the Black elites, their goal is to live good. And through their living good, they can inspire other Black people to live good, to amass fiat, to obtain status, and to enjoy all the fruits of the empire.
Right. Right.
So I wish we were fighting against a failed or short-sighted talent. It's much worse than that.
Mm.
It's so much worse than the talented 10. It's more of a petty bourgeoisie, because the talented 10th weren't just supposed to be more talented than us. They were to utilize their talents on behalf of the Black race.
Yes, for sure.
The talented 10th, if you look at the details, were to be servants of the Black race.
Mm.
And they were leaders, but also servants. They were to construct and guide us along a specific path from oppression to freedom. That was their goals. You don't even hear them saying that. So you can't even call them regressive. So I think we give them too much credit when we call them talented 10.
Mm.
Obama's not talented 10.
Right.
You know, so and even elites is too strong a word. I know we have to use the language that we know, but they're not true elites either.
Mm.
They don't own and control means of production. They don't engage in statecraft, but the main characteristics of any population of elites that distinguish from one group of elites is conflict.
Right.
You know, elites are, or as Nas said about him and Biggie, he said the best are supposed to clash at the top. So when you look at true elites, one thing that defines the elites is they're in constant struggle against each other.
Mm.
Name a population of elites that Black elites struggle against.
Mm.
Now, I can tell you about conflicts. I can tell you about the Arab oligarchs and their fight against the Zionists. You know, I can tell you about the Islamic elites and their fight against Christendom. I can tell you about the Eastern European oligarchs and their fight against the European parliaments and their struggles and their tactical and ideological struggles. I can talk about Indian elite versus Pakistani elites.
Mm. Right. But
I can tell you about the tech. I can tell you about the tech elites and their fight against the old world fossil fuel elites.
Mm-hmm.
Who do the Black elites, as you define them, name a population of elites that they're engaged in struggle against?
They would like to put out that they are in struggle against the Republican Party. From what
they're not. Well, again. Struggles against the Republican Party, they don't have an independent Black party fighting. They fight through the Democratic Party.
Right.
So they are assets of the Democratic Party.
Right.
So they're not elites.
Right.
Even when Obama was president, he was literally the number one Democrat in the country, the number one man in the second most powerful party in the United States. Right. What was Obama's agenda? Obama's entire political platform was a copy-paste from the Clinton neoliberal platform. Obama's campaign staff consisted of former Bill Clinton campaign staff, up into and hiring his wife after she gave him a shakedown and disrespected him on the world stage during the primary race.
Right.
So even when Negroes get elite titles, they have what is called elite bank accounts. 8-9-figure bank accounts. When they get in positions, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, heading the U.S. military, if they don't come with the Black elite agenda, what is the Black elite agenda besides getting closer to and further embedded within the white elites and enjoying all the spoils of Western capitalism? Beyond that, what is the agenda of the white? And then helping a few other Negroes to get to that status. There is no Black elite.
Right.
And it hurts me that we call them that, but we don't have a better name for them. Well, there's several names: the petty bourgeoisie, or the what is called the pompadour or the comprador class. You know, the what do they call? There are several names for these people who wear all the finest clothes. but and attend all the balls. They are on the red carpet. They're in the limos. But when decisions about management and domination of the world are made, those Negroes are sent out of the room.
Mm.
They come for parties. They come for the cocktails. They come for the flash photography and to be standing arm in arm with the elites. But when real decisions are being made about warfare, about resource extraction, about manipulating the very atmosphere of the planet, they're sent out of the room.
But what's funny to me about that, Brother Diallo, is maybe funny is not the right choice of words, but in like Obama, beloved figure in our community, right? But whenever I start to notice whatever differences in the election cycle between Democrats and Republicans, a lot of times when it comes to foreign policy that will further American foreign interests, it's like it's all the same. What's the difference? Like whenever we look at no matter who's the president, whenever we look at what goes on overseas, what's different about one party to the next?
Well, America has fixed agenda, goals, and principles, but America can vary greatly in methodology and tactics.
Okay.
And there's also prioritization.
Mm-hmm.
So there is difference between Democrat and Republican.
Mm-hmm.
There are, in a lot of ways, the Democratic Party is a much better party than the Republican. There are some redeeming characteristics within the Democratic platform overall, where there is literally not one redeeming quality of the Republican. I have understanding and some sympathies for Black Democrats, but Black Republicans are race traitors.
Yeah, most definitely.
Now, the problem is, I've always said, and I've had people get upset with me, that I said that it is intellectually lazy to say that there's no difference between the Democrats and Republicans. And saying that they're acknowledging a difference is not an endorsement of one of the other.
Mm-hmm.
There is a difference between syphilis and gonorrhea. Am I saying we should embrace one and reject the other?
No, not at all.
And the reason you have to acknowledge the differences is because the tactics for opposition differ. Mm-hmm. If I live in a Democratic machine-controlled city, mm-hmm. in a predominantly democratically controlled state, mm-hmm. governor is a Democrat, the state legislature is Democrat, the city council is predominantly Democrat, the mayor is a Democrat. And as you organize or engage within a system or try to cultivate struggle and organize Black people in this environment is much different than when I lived in Missouri. That was predominantly Republican. It was the red state. So I don't say if you live in a Democratic state, you've reached home base, you're safe.
Right.
But a really good example. In Illinois, there is a moratorium on the death penalty. Mm-hmm. There still must be a criminal justice struggles here. Mm-hmm. There is still police brutality. There is still a extreme, obscene imbalance in budget priorities in terms of money going towards imprisonment, sanctions, extracting, tickets, and punitive policies, the police budget and police training. There's all those struggles. But one struggle we don't got here is the death penalty. So we can reorient some resources and energies away from where we would have had to fight that mm-hmm. towards other issues within that arena and the larger. But if I lived in Missouri, they have the death penalty and they're killing Black people. Mm-hmm. The state is executing Black people and is enthusiastically doing it. So in addition to all that other work that we saw going on in Ferguson, Missouri, the Kansas City PD that shot that pregnant woman a couple of years ago, mm-hmm. in addition to all that other work, they also have to have a larger movement towards abolition of the death penalty, removing people from death row, and exposing that atrocity. So depending on where you work and which party governs or has dominance or predominance, if you live in a state where it's Democratic dominated, there is less chance for Black people to negotiate for concessions from the local government, because the Democrats don't really have to negotiate with you. But if you live in a purple state where there is a constant ebb and flow of which party takes, then you're in a very good position to go in and say, listen, if this policy isn't on the docket, then we walk. So they have to cater to you. In a red state, they can be like, you can't really get concessions or maneuver through the state. You have to do it through protest, resistance, subversion. So wherever you're organizing and whoever's in power, you know, whether you live in a one party or contested state, it's the same thing with the economics. Some people live in company towns. Some people live in completely blotted areas. Some areas of the country have no like wealthy Blacks. Other areas where they have what I call these fiefdoms, where there's these wealthy, influential Blacks. Like you come to Chicago, there's very wealthy, influential Black factions here in this society that you have to navigate through. And anything you're trying to do, they can lift it up or shut it down. So wherever you are organizing, you have to basically do an assessment of where you are, what are the various relationships what is the level of development, of conscious development, how powerful are the local churches. You know, I was doing youth work down on the Missouri-Tennessee border, and if the church didn't give you a thumb up, there's nothing you could do there.
Wow.
The church would, and there was this whole separation of church and state. But anyway, I'm getting a bit off. So in terms of the Democrats and the Republicans, they have things in common. They are both capitalist parties. They are both imperialist parties.
I guess before you go any further, that was what I was referring to when there's similarities, meaning that agenda being furthered. Whenever you, not to cut you off, but I wanted to ask you, because you brought up a point. Whenever I know you've had these conversations a lot, and I'm pretty sure you've talked to people who are extremely disillusioned with the whole thing as far as both parties are concerned, right? What's your idea on how we strategically, for those that are a part of the political process, how we strategically get the things that we need, I guess, that would make our lives a little bit better until, like, you know, some real shit pops off?
First, when Black people are dealing with politics in general, because call them capitalist, to say that both parties are capitalist, both parties are imperialist, both parties support global white hegemony, both parties are Zionist. There's a lot of day-to-day shit. Those are very broad concepts. Right. But when it comes down to your grandma's insulin or your niece's housing voucher, what chemicals or toxins are allowed into the food, you still got to deal with all that shit. And a lot of times we as revolutionaries, we're like capitalism and dealing with imperialism. And we think that as we navigate that, we can just ignore all this stuff, and people that are concerned with the price of insulin are somehow lesser than us. Right. The people who want to stop the imperialist machine are doing greater work than those who are trying to make sure people in our community have insulin or
even you saying that, you know, there are people in my family that I have conversations with often, and this is something that they watch. They're diabetic and they're watching, you know, the price of insulin like do these crazy numbers now. And, you know, you're right. I mean, there are things within our day-to-day lives that we have to address. We have to be able to, you know, make things a little bit easier for the elderly, the children, and you're right. So I do understand and agree with that. But continue your point, because I just know that some, like you said, even, and I've done this before. I've been guilty of this before, where I see capitalism, imperialism, white global domination, all of this shit happening overseas, Obama dropping bombs everywhere, and and then you get to the point where it's like, fuck both of them. But at the same time, you're right. There's a process, and there's like, okay, let me ask you this. So being Martin Luther King Day, and I've seen a lot of conversation and discussion online where people will say the people that were fighting in the civil rights movement were integrationists and they were absolutely wrong for everything that they were doing. Do you think that is an accurate assessment? Because whenever I speak, being from the South, especially whenever I speak to like the elders, like, I think we have this idea that every Black neighborhood was a quote unquote Black Wall Street. And even if it did have a Black Wall Street, every Black person within the community benefited from that Black Wall Street. Like, we have these ideas to where why would we want to integrate? And I'm not saying integration was a good thing in the long run, but what I am saying is there was some facilities all throughout the rural South that weren't really up to par. I'm not saying that we couldn't have built them up, but I just wanted to know what your thoughts is on those who say that we got nothing out of the civil rights movement.
Then these are people who deny the evidence of history. And I've had people tell me things are worse now than before integration. And I think it's very disrespectful to our history, to our ancestors, really, and the struggle of our ancestors. I say this quote often. Dale Jones said that there was a time in this country where a Black man could get a knock at the door, and it's a message from a white man saying, "Send your wife up to the big house. I feel frisky." And then the next night, there's a knock at the door saying, "Send your daughter up to the big house. I'm gonna break her in." And then there's another night where there's a knock at the door and says, "Send your young child, send your young son up. I'm a freak." And the Black man had no recourse to either comply or have his home burnt down and to be publicly lynched and mutilated and burned alive in front of the whole community. I have relatives in my family who that I knew, that some of them have passed, but my grandmother grew up in segregation and talked to me about the trauma of that era. My wife's father told her a story about when he would go to school in Mississippi and would see lynched bodies, mutilated body parts. He would see men buried up to their shoulders in the dirt, and white boys would throw stones and bricks at their heads. And they would just cross the path and just have to look away. Bloated corpses. Emmett Till, we all know Emmett Till's name. But do you know what made Emmett Till stand out? It wasn't the fact that he was killed in the way he was killed. That's not what made Emmett Till stand out, because that was routine behavior. The thing that solidified Emmett Till's name in the history books was the fact that the mother wouldn't allow him to be buried without a public display of the body. Right. But back in the day, when you had a family member that was lynched, you weren't looked at as a victim. You were looked at as someone who didn't know how to go along to get along. Malcolm X wrote about in his biography, after his father was murdered and cut in half, had his body mutilated, his mother couldn't get a job. So down in lynching didn't just happen in the South. Right. In the South, they hung us from trees. In the North, they hung us from light posts.
Right.
The reason why most of the lynching happened in the South is because 90% of Black people lived in the South at that era.
Most definitely.
They saw as Black people started having what is falsely called the Great Migration, which it was not a Great Migration, is they started seeing racialized violence. The Red Summer.
Yeah.
And so people are like, oh, the North, it wasn't because the North was less racist. It's just that the North had fewer black people.
Right.
And we saw that as more black people begin to migrate west and north, we saw that white aggression was just as, in fact, Dr. King said that one of the most racist places he had been to was the north side of Chicago. He's faced the most vicious racist. That's where that photo of that brick grazing his cranium, that wasn't taken down south, where we got images of Dr. King being pelted by bricks and cups of urine. That came from the north. So anyway, it is disgusting that black people today, where, you know, even though things are bad, we don't have to discount the progress we made. We don't have to discount the atrocities of the past to highlight the injustices of today. The injustices of today, murder by police, the medical malpractice, the medical murder, the genocidal policies, the erosion of education, the targeting and disruption and maladaptations of the black family. Those are all problems we face today that we have to address. But we don't have to discount or fantasize about where we came from in order to highlight or emphasize how bad things are now. There has been progress, but Dr. Amos Wilson said, if we look at history, we have to know that history is not a status where people continue to progress. You can have progress and regression. There has been some accomplishments and sustained progress, and there has been some regression. There have been many things gained, and there have been some things lost. And we need a sober assessment of what that is.
Right.
It's reactionary to say things are better back then, or they want to go back to back then. My great-grandfather was a brilliant man, and he was mangled. He worked a job where he didn't have HIPAA. He didn't have OSHA policies. He was working a job where he was paid in cash, and it was inconsistently paid. He didn't have legal recourse. One of his hands were mangled, and the physician, he lost several fingers on a hand, and the company told the company physician, conflict of interest, and the insurance company, all under the same umbrella, said, sew the fingers back on because we only pay him per finger. So leave 2 fingers off, we'll pay him for 2, and sew 2 fingers back on. And the fingers were improperly reattached and they necrosed. My grandfather was crippled. And there wasn't no lawsuit. And you got brothers today going to work in air-conditioned cubicles talking about things were better back then with OSHA protection.
Right.
So I'm not saying that it is that we've reached the promised land.
Right.
I think black people, we need to intensify our struggles. I think the shame is on us because we got more tools today at our disposal, and we're doing less with more. So our ancestors were fighting in much more hostile conditions with much fewer resources, physical, material, and cultural and ideological resources, and organizing under worse, much more dangerous conditions.
Right.
And so people to be organizing in the 2000s, black people to be organizing who take up the struggle, who take the baton from our ancestors to try to downplay what they went through or even fantasize and idealize what things went on back then, that really disgusts me. And I'm tired of hearing that because I'm hearing it from all sides, even from people I respect. Things were better back then. Things were not better back then. Things were not better back then. And you're looking at these statistics without doing any in-depth analysis, 70%, 2-parent households, all that.
Yeah, they like to bring that one up a lot.
Yeah. But I tell you, like I said, there's so many brilliant Africans that never had the opportunities that we have today. And when we do take advantage of those opportunities, we squander it. Individualism.
Right.
Like I say all the time, my great-grandmother was very Afrocentric. And if you had called her African, she would have thought you were trying to insult her. But the way she lived her day-to-day life in a communal fashion
was very African.
Wasn't no childcare industry. So there were some good things that we had, but we traded and we lost the good shit. And then we want to lie and act like it was all good because we lost some of the good characteristics and good practices and cultural characteristics that we lost back then. But we don't have to pretend like those good characteristics stopped one bullet, stopped our ancestors from hanging from rope, stopped our children from having malnutrition.
Right.
rickets,
right,
and other diseases of malnutrition, shortened stature, lack of cognitive development and fetal development was rampant throughout the Black America. We were starving to death. We had basically famines
and
in this country. And I'm not saying hunger is still an issue now, but come on, we don't need to distort the truth.
right.
You know, we don't need to distort reality in order to enlighten our people. And in fact, if you are distorting reality, you're not teaching, you're not educating, you are manipulating and indoctrinating.
Right. No, yeah, that's real. I remember reading a speech that Du Bois had at Johnson C. Smith, where I think it was on the heels of integration more than, and Johnson C. Smith is a historically Black university in Charlotte, and he was speaking about how through integration, we would lose our culture. He said that we would be moved very, very far away from Africa. You don't agree? Because
first of all,
before you go in, the reason, and some may agree, because if we look at ourselves now as a whole, it seems to be that we are obviously assimilating into American culture. And we've been doing, but the thing about it is we were doing that at that time as well. You know what I'm saying? But go ahead.
That's why that's all you said.
Yeah.
Do you think we were all Afrocentric militants until Dr. King had a dream?
Right.
There were patriotic Negroes throughout since the Emancipation Proclamation, since the first Black man got his U.S. citizenship, since the signing of the 14th. In fact, Black people have been one of the most loyal and patriotic demographics. Black people have been more loyal than any other ethnic racial group in this country.
Right.
So yeah, even during Jim Crow, we were still patriotic and integrated into the American system. I don't understand why we pretend like integration. I'm anti-integrationist. Right. I think we invested way too much and got such a minor return. I am not an integrationist. I think integrationist movement subverted the true movement, which is liberation. To me, integration is synonymous with surrender.
Right.
Integration is synonymous with erasure. So I'm not championing integration. But I mean, integration is bad enough. We don't have to pretend that it did shit it didn't do. We can just focus on what it actually did do.
Right.
You ain't got to lie, Craig. Integration, it was a bad call. It's bad. It was bad then and it's bad now. We had people calling it out back then, and we should still should call it out now. It is a fail. Back then, it was a reactionary and a short-sighted policy. Today, it is a abject failure.
Right.
And we've got over half a century of evidence to demonstrate the failures of racial integration and desegregation. Now we have a half century of data to show how that failed. Before, when Malcolm X was saying integration, and Malcolm X and Kwame Ture were denouncing integration, they were speculating. They were using history. They were using analysis, radical analysis, but it wasn't no concrete evidence they could point to because we weren't integrated at that time.
Right.
So all the promises of integration, you couldn't say whether they would be fulfilled or not. Well, you could say they were right in their assessment. It did play out as the Black radicals said it would play out. But now there's no denying it. And right now, the Black leaders, the leading Blacks, cultural, political, economic, Black upper echelon, are now saying the solution to the failings of integration is more integration, more aggressive integration.
What more?
And even a lot of Blacks like Dr. Umar, they're not liberationists. They're aggressive, radical. They're militant integrationists.
How can we integrate even more than what we've already done?
More Black lawyers, more Black doctors, more Black entrepreneurs, more Black billionaires, more Black Grammys, more Black Golden Globes, another Black president, maybe a Black female president, maybe a Black queer female president. You know,
Black first in America still happening
yeah,
in
that's more
2023.
integration.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's like that's that whole.
More money for HBCUs, more funding for HBCUs, more black cops,
Okay, brother Diallo, just
more
for
black men head of households, more alpha males. Even the militants want more integration. They want to live whiter than white people. They want Judeo-Christian values and hierarchies.
um and I'm with you. My stance on integration was obviously completely. I've read enough to know that it was a failure. I've seen things now to understand that it was a failure. My thing is I'm just not as I can I can judge the policies that were created then, right? But sometimes I feel like we're overly judgmental of the people that were actually going through it, right? And you kind of brought that up with your whenever we were speaking about integration as a whole, and that's the only thing, like, such and such was weak, and if it was me back then, I would have did this. That kind of talk is just, yeah, I hate that kind of shit.
The people didn't want integration. The black leaders did.
Right, right, right.
The people wanted their land. They wanted proper compensation. They wanted an ability to get just pay for the work they do. They wanted education and security.
Right.
The people had very specific and what I call pedestrian and practical demands.
Mm-hmm.
The black masses did not desire to be physically closer. They did not want more proximity with white people. The average black person utterly despised the average white person.
Right.
And the average black person was more comfortable in the company and living. And when black people even had the resources to move away, they stayed amongst ourselves. And that was the basic disposition of black people then, and to a lesser extent, but still dominant now. Black people, by and large, prefer to live, prefer to be educated by, and to give education to marry and intermingle with, and eat our own goddamn food. We don't want them goddamn raisin casseroles. So where did this myth that black people were under the impression? In fact, they had to sell black people on integration. They weren't just promoting integration to white people. They were simultaneously promoting it to blacks. The great American melting pot, the great American melting pot. Because again, if you talk to my great grandmother in public, she says, "Oh, I love everybody because Jesus loved everybody." But if you talk to her behind the scenes, she's like, "Them Peckerwoods, that ain't no good."
Same shit. Same shit.
Or the bugger got no shame. They got no shame. They shameless folks. Stay away from over there. We wanted nothing. We knew how aggressive, how hypocritical, how degenerate our oppressor was.
Right.
Our leaders packaged and sold integration to us at the same time they were requesting it from them. And so in order to get ahead, if you wanted to be a black person of status, remember, without the black, they started demonizing black separatists.
Right.
You're a black separatist. You're a black militant. And you go look at the media from that time.
Especially Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad. You
go look at the media and the propaganda from that time. You go look at the movies. You go look at the so-called black exploitation movies. And anytime a black person came with red, black, and green, leather, militant, whenever they came, they were always lying. First of all, they were dishonest. They were militant and angry on the surface, but deep down, they were only angry because they couldn't get to white women.
Right.
There was a movie called The Black Gestapo. And the movie starts off as a beautiful adventure of a black man who was a member of a progressive organization, and the white cops and the white people were raping and committing atrocities against our community. And he went to the leader of this pacifist organization and says, listen, let me form a cadre, let me form a coalition of brothers who gonna handle this type of stuff. And we won't even come to the meetings. We will be a separate guerrilla faction. And the leaders, the guy who was the leader of that peaceful organization, his girlfriend was assaulted by 2 cops. And that shows us, like, yes, we need we need the Black Panther Party for self-defense, which is political, community-based, but we also need a Black Liberation Army.
Right.
To do extra legal shit. And the guy was handling his business. He literally castrated the white cop that assaulted this sister. But then when he took over, he was worse than the white man. He was worse. So there was that message was even in the 90s, they weren't done. Go back and look at the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Go back and look at the Cosby Show. Anytime there was a Black person that had any type of cultural consciousness, they were played as a hypocrite and or a villain or a buffoon. I said, if man, anything that was pro-Black was buffoonery, insincere, or hypocritical. So they did a lot to Black people. We tend to think that we were sitting around talking about we want to be equal. We want to sit next to white folks on the bus. We want to drink out the same fountain as these people. We know how they live, and we was cleaning their house.
Right.
We know how they live.
Right.
So we didn't want to eat at we want to eat at their lunch counter.
The Trojan horse was the schools. Right.
Right. So,
but my grandmother, not to cut you, but my grandmother, she told me that it was my own mother actually. Her experience with the Black school that she went to was so much better and so much more communal.
So was mine. Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't have my first white teacher was when I was in special ed. I was in special ed. They flunked me. They held me back a grade and said something was wrong with my brain, and they put me in special ed. That's the first time I had a white teacher. Wow. But all the schools I went to, all Black schools and an all Black neighborhood, all Black teachers, all Black janitors, all Black principals, every principals of my grade school. Up until I got to middle school, I was hopping around middle schools. I went to several middle schools, but then I first had some female Black women and Black men who were principals at that in middle school. But through grade school, I went to several grade schools too, because housing instability.
Right.
So, and I was homeless at parts of my childhood, and so I went to several schools, but all Black teachers. And then I spent 1 year in special ed. Had a white teacher. Worst school year of my life in many respects. And then after that, back to it. And then I got into trouble and I got expelled. And so they put me in Catholic school to keep me from having to go to like the reform school. So that was the first time I had like a mix of white and Black teachers, because I went to a private Catholic school through freshman to senior year. But my middle school and grade school, predominantly Black. And I'm not that old. I look old, but I went to grade school in the 80s and 90s, So that was in the post-integration, post-civil rights era.
So when we talk about like Thurgood Marshall and the lawyers at Howard, obviously they began to bring up the Plessy versus Ferguson, the separate but equal type of thing, right? So what was
the NAACP was a bourgeois organization. That's why they went and got Harriet Tubman sisters, young Black single mothers, Claudette Colvin. There were Black women and Black men sitting on the front of that bus and telling them crackers to get out their face. They're gonna sit where they want to sit because they paid their money.
Said Polly Murray did it 15 years before Rosa.
Right. But the NAACP said, well, we can't have these inarticulate Negroes.
Right.
We can't have a single mother or some brogue iron overall wearing Negro. We needed a polished, dainty little lady. The fairer her skin, the better. And a little pillbox hat tilted. who had a respectable job, who knew how to articulate, and that was a political theater. I think we need to start acknowledging that. And the black people weren't sitting on the front of the bus because that's where the white folks sit. They were sitting there because they paid their money and they were tired and they sat where the hell they wanted to sit. It was about our dignity, not about integrating with white people, but preserving black dignity and self-respect. And the NAACP, going all the way back, probably one of the best researchers we had to really blow this up, Dr. William Mackey, and his essays on called The History and Betrayal of the NAACP. That was founded by white people, and to this day it is predominantly funded by white people. And again, NAACP, again, they promoted and indoctrinated the black community into integration. Integration, we think integration was something that we asked white people for. No, it is something that was sold to us as aggressively as it was pushed on the white majority.
I've seen some civil rights activists of that time speak about how the conditions, I guess, made them feel as if, well, it was an esteem issue with black people in the black community not having full access to anywhere they would want to go within a nation,
that was definitely an issue. That was definitely an issue. But and the surveys also demonstrate black people wanted to repeal the Jim Crow laws. But again, it wasn't so that they could rub shoulders with white people. It was so that we could navigate this system. It was about preserving our human dignity.
Right.
And it got warped into thinking black people, the white ice is colder and white people want it. And it's true, we fell for it. We took the poison pill.
Right.
Claude Anderson writes quite a bit about how black people, when the storm gate was opened and you could go up in the fancy white hotels, the black masses like, well, who cares staying in these black boarding houses? And a lot of the things that sustained us prior to desegregation.
No longer good enough.
We fell for it, but it was sold on us.
Right.
Can you imagine? You got black people been selling barbecue in the black community for generations.
And then you go to Dickies.
After 1968, black folks going to eat white folks' food.
Yeah, fuck. Yeah. That's real.
So yeah, I agree. We fell for the okie doke, but it was a deliberate and targeted campaign.
I think that's where a lot of people don't realize and understand the fact that it was deliberate and targeted. Just like
the most popular movement prior to the civil rights movement was what? The Back to Africa movement. That was our natural inclination.
Yeah.
That was the message that was most receptive. Black people predominantly worked in agriculture at that time. And Garvey said there's a place with a lot of land and a lot of people that look like us and very few and next to no people that look like them. And black people was like, sign me up. Right. And sharecroppers, illiterate sharecroppers gave Garvey millions of dollars to buy boats to get us the hell out of here.
Right.
So when we were able to organize without white indoctrination and white interference, our natural inclination was to go back home to Africa or create little Africas here. Also, if you look at the early organizations, they were not Negro organizations. They weren't even black organizations.
They were African.
The earliest organizations after emancipation were all called African. Yep. African Lodge, African Methodist Episcopal. We called ourselves African. So it took a lot of time and a lot of resources to get the black people to default to integration and equality.
Right.
We, the black separatists, were the strongest voice that drowned out everyone else. And they had to give Dr. King the Nobel Peace Prize and the biggest platform, satellite broadcast, NBC, ABC, and broadcast like, no, this is the way you want to go. This is the way to freedom. Because our natural default was back to Africa and separatism.
Right. And like you said,
it wasn't because we're hostile, we're xenophobic people. We're quite the opposite. Our characteristics is quite xenophilic. But like I said, we were very close. It's like, separation was never a problem. White people would hire black women to suckle white babies at their breast. We cleaned their food, we cleaned their homes, we did their laundry.
Right.
We raised a goddamn little badass kid. Who you think was scrubbing the pots in the kitchen?
Mm.
Who you think if we weren't cooking the foods directly, they were trying to mimic our recipes. So this whole thing that blacks and whites were separate and then we brought them together. We were fully integrated. The problem was never proximity. It was always power.
Mm.
White people had no issues with our presence if they had power over us.
Right.
White people didn't run out to the suburbs to after black people said, you put your hands on me, I'm gonna fuck your shit up. If you disrespect me, I'm gonna smack the shit out you. That's when I can't live around these. Oh, the inner city's a dangerous place. They only got away from us when we said we're no longer gonna allow you to treat us in a subhuman fashion. And that's when they figured out, I can't live around these people. I can't let my kids go to school with this. Prior to that, we were well ingrained. We knew all their intimate secrets.
Yeah.
We were their custodians in their corporate high rises. So we got this notion that white people want to be separate from us. White flight, the dumbest word I ever heard from white flight. And we think white people moved away from us because we was black and they weren't black. When they moved away from us because the power dynamic shifted. And I promise you, as you look at these organizations like the Proud Boys, the Tea Party, the MAGA movement, and you look at Diamond and Silk, when you look at these buffoonish Kanye West, white folks is some white supremacists, white skinhead, white aggressors went and created a huge banner and threw it over the highway. Kanye's right.
Mm.
And there are Negroes, there are 6 sellout, cool handkerchief head Uncle Tom Negroes to this day who go to trailer parks and go and maneuver and black Confederates.
Right.
So yeah, white people know how to accept our presence if it's in a position of extreme subordination and dehumanizing positions.
Mm.
And there are black people that rock and be around some of the biggest racists.
And so
Donald Trump been a racist all his life, and he's taking pictures with every prominent Negro in the world.
Right.
Because those Negroes know their place. The big bad, what's that football player? Jim Brown.
Yeah.
He said in an interview, I was in the Playboy Mansion and I never experienced racism because I knew how to behave myself. I got in the proper chair and I stayed in that chair until I was given permission to get up. You hear Negroes to this day, you walk around like, I've never had a problem with cops. I've never had a problem. I've never experienced racism.
You remember that Lil Wayne interview?
Right. Yeah, Lil Wayne, because Lil Wayne's a minstrel. They love minstrels. They love black people who will not only degrade themselves, but be willing to degrade and dehumanize their own people.
Mm.
So this is never, so even getting it, we can be in close proximity with them and still be under genocidal oppression and losing ground, or we could be segregated, most segregated school district. And my son goes, I think he said there's 2 white kids in my son's entire school.
Mm-hmm.
And he said they're the most progressive, woke, radical people. They're like, fight the power. Them white kids. Bless them white kids. I don't know who they are. But my son goes to an all-black school, black principals, predominantly black teachers. My son does not feel segregated. Right now in this town, you got children of affluent, children of black doctors and black physicians fighting to get their kids up on the north side and up under these. When we got independent African-centered schools, predominantly black public schools.
Right.
You know, so this shit, integration was something that we were indoctrinated into. It's not our natural default.
So that's
what we don't have to lie about what it is and what it means, though.
Yeah, no, that's real. And like how we were building about some of the initial ideas of what liberation looked like was back to Africa, and it wasn't obviously just Garvey. You know, people like Martin Delaney, a lot of brothers and sisters that you know, after emancipation and even during emancipation, well, before, you know, had these thoughts and these ideas would flow through our community, and they would gain steam. And, you know, Marcus Garvey to me obviously would be the culmination of all that. But let's say he was never deported. No. Why would America, who, especially then in those days, give and they still do to this day, let's not get it twisted, but give you the impression that they do not want you here, right? But going back to Africa, like hell no, we gotta stop that movement. Like you don't want us here, you don't want us to go back to Africa. What's the whole idea? What kind of mind games are they playing?
I mean, do you mean in the modern era or
No,
in
I
the
meant like back then in the Black Power movement with, you had the separatists and you had, and even within Garvey's movement, right? But there were like, especially then because racism was more overt, right? In a lot of ways. But why would they want to thwart these movements if they did not want us here?
uh they wanted, well, there was a very successful Back to Africa movement.
You mean with the ACS?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they transplanted a large population of black people there, and the black people there went there and began to behave like white people.
Yes, yes.
They set up a
They terrible
discriminatory
with the
government.
natives.
They
Yeah.
began
Mm-hmm.
to repress
Mm-hmm.
and systematically murder
Yep.
the indigenous people of Liberia. They even created a little American flag. It looks just like the US
Yep.
flag, except it's 1 star instead of 50.
Right.
So the problem with Garvey going back is not that Garvey wanted to go back to Africa, it's the ideology.
Mm.
It's the ideology. Garvey wanted to unify Africans and have Africans self-governing. Garvey didn't want to go to Africa and replicate white governance. He wanted to go there and institute African governance on Africa for Africans, not to be agents or proxies or puppets of the West, but to be self-determined. Because, I mean, if you got the right ideology, they don't care where you go.
Right. Right.
So it was more so an issue about Garvey's ideology, more so than
Yeah, I got then physically
desire to
going
go
to
to
Africa
Africa.
itself.
Like right now,
yeah.
you got Jay-Z owns a home.
Well, that's I was about to ask you.
They're not gonna stop him.
You just you kind of, I saw the back and forth you had with the famous rapper and him saying that like they're the answer for Africa.
Right.
These celebrities that go there, do you like what do you are their intent? What do you think their intentions are?
They are Trojan horses. You mentioned the concept of Trojan horses. The issue is China is outpacing the United States in terms of influence in Africa. We're under the system of neo-colonialism, and the United States government is equipped for traditional colonialism. Traditional colonialism is military occupation, military overthrow. So the United States is very skilled at carrying out coups d'etats, with fomenting uprisings and destabilizing governments using what is called, are you familiar with Confessions of an Economic Hitman?
Oh, I haven't read the book.
Well, he said there's 3 stages. You have the economic hitman, you have the jackals. So the economic hitman come there and basically buy people off, bribe people, and shunt resources and money around in order to get the will of the West. And even though they act on behalf of the U.S. government, they are not government agents. They work for multinational corporations, and basically the multinational corporations get federal grants and federal funding to have these people who are on private payrolls. That way, if they can get caught, there's plausible deniability to go to Africa and manipulate Africa's politics for the interest of the West. And then you have the jackals. If the economic hitmen, you have Africans who aren't willing to be bought off, Patrice Lumumba, Steve Biko, Kwame Nkrumah. You have African leaders who aren't willing to be bought off by the hitmen, the economic hitmen. They send in what is called the jackals. The jackals are saboteurs and assassins. So they do small-scale disruption and destabilization to get the people to turn against their government. Oh, the government is not competent. The water's contaminated. They had this major sewage project, and there were all these problems and delays, and materials couldn't come, and the ship was sunk, or there was a collapse in a building that was going up, housing or schools, and the schools being built, and the next day the scaffolding is all gone, and the corruption. And so those were the jackals who do that shit. If that fails, then they send in the Marines. So that is traditional colonization and manipulation. And even with traditional colonization, they would have puppet leaders like Mobutu Sese Seko, and I would even say Mugabe, Jomo Kenyatta, the neo-colonial puppets. And the United States is masterful. So you had two stages of neo-colonialism, or the first colonialism was direct colonialism. And the champions of that were the British Empire, followed by the French, and they outpaced the Germans, they outpaced the Italians, the Portuguese, and the Spanish. The first one were the Spanish, but that's a different epoch in history. Yes. That's pre-industrial, pre-capitalist white aggression. And so you had direct colonization. After that, you had the first phase of neo-colonialism with the puppet regimes and all that. And that was when U.S. took over from Great Britain as the seat of white power. But now you have even a neo. It's a whole new, it's neoliberal colonialism, and the neoliberal post, and this type of colonialism is the post-Soviet or post-Cold War colonialism. So you had neo-colonialism, then you have post-Cold War colonialism, and China is outpacing the U.S. So China doesn't come with jackals and hitmen. They come with projects. China has trillions of dollars of U.S. capital and really U.S. debt. So the U.S. promises China to pay, China, because the U.S. is in debt to China, and then China goes and distributes those promises. It's all paper. It's all made up shit. Right. There's no our real material resources, our bauxite, our coltan, our shipping, our shipping lanes, our Africa's coastal reserves, all that shit. Real concrete shit, and we're taking the debt from the U.S. and that is promised to China, and we're accepting China's debt. So if the U.S. defaults, and that's why they're like, oh, China could shut us down because everything's made in China. If China does that, then China would collapse too. So they frenemies. Right. But anyway, all that to say, let me try to shorten this. This is very interesting to me. This is, political science, policy, international politics. But the bottom line is, United States is being outpaced because the United States is still using outdated tactics, and nobody likes it. The last big move was Gaddafi and Obama. Obama did economic sanctions. Is considered old school. Then he brought in the drone bombs. Then he armed and drove the fundamentalist insurgents, destabilized the whole region. Whereas China comes in and says, "Listen, we'll do a dam. We'll do a highway. We'll put in a water system. We'll wire you up for internet." And so they come in with their money. It's the same goal, to extract Africa, to put in as little into Africa as possible, to get out as much as possible. It's a colonial extractatory. And this is another thing. China needs land. China's ecosystem is highly contaminated through being the production center for industrial capitalism. They have a contaminated population. They have an obscene imbalance, male to female imbalances. So basically, just like every other foreign empire, Africa's the solution to many of China's problems. And China is using modern techniques and tactics to come there. So they don't send hitmen, they don't send jackals, they send engineers. They send physicians, they send surveyors. And so the United States is behind. So the United States says we don't have the capital to compete with China because they got our money. We gave them all our money to make our iPhones and Jordans. So we don't have the money. And when we use our drones, we got the weapons because that's where the money we do have, we spent on weapons. And all our infrastructure and manufacturing shit is overseas because we could generate great profit. So we don't really have the capital. We don't have the mass projects. Like United States doesn't have high-speed rail. Right. United States, I mean, the fucking bridges are collapsing here. Yeah. So how are we going to be building infrastructure in Africa so what we do have is culture. We got the most fire music. We got the Marvel DC universe. We got the swag. The Negroes here, everybody around the world. You go to China, people's like, "What's up, my nigga?" You have artists, you talk to them, they go to Belarus, they go to Turkey, they go to Turkmenistan. They go to Indonesia, people who don't know English, and they rap word for word. And it ain't even the modern stuff. Chief Keef going all over the world. You go there, Biggie Smalls, Tupac, T-shirts, Biggie Smalls and Tupac. I was just went to a talk given by Danny Boy. And he talked about he was in rural Africa where they didn't even have electricity. Like at night, it was pitch black. They had like, it was like a steampunk. It was like gas power generators lit up the whole town. There was no electrical infrastructure, but they had Tupac T-shirts. They didn't speak English, but they could go line for line. It was all a dream. I used to read Word Up magazine. Can't speak English, but they could do Biggie Smalls with a U.S. accent, a Brooklyn accent. So that's what the United States has. It has culture, cultural influence, and black cultural icons. Ain't no black cultural icons
in China.
There ain't no black cultural icons. So many of these people, Dave Chappelle, many of these, who was it? Somebody was telling me they were going to Ghana. Some celebrity said, oh, I told Jay-Z I was going to Ghana, and Jay-Z pulled out his phone and showed me pictures of his villa in Ghana. These black people are trying to buy the U.S. time to catch up with China or to displace China. Now, the United States is still saying, let's go back to the old ways. That's what AFRICOM is all about.
Right.
They want to do it old school because they were like, well, weapon for weapon, gun for gun, bullet for bullet. Can't nobody step to us. But China's like, I'm not trying to shoot it out with you. I'm just putting money on the table. You put bombs on the table and let the Africans decide who they want to exploit them in the 2000s. So either way, Africa loses.
Right.
Well, I'm not saying Africa should choose China over the United States.
Right.
Africa should choose Africans. And there are some leaders, there are some organizations, movement of the people, the economic freedom fighters, people who understand this game that I'm laying out better than I do because they're on the front lines of it. But when you got black celebrities going there saying, we're going to open schools, but they don't ever share the curriculum.
No, yeah, you never see that.
And they don't even ask to see it.
Right.
I mean, shit, we're going to ask about the Ghanaian schools curriculum. They didn't ask LeBron, can we see your curriculum?
Right.
What are the credentials of your administrators?
Right.
We see pictures of an elaborate school with Nike shoes all over the wall, and we like, thank you, LeBron.
When we talk about China, and leftist communities, though, especially, I've seen this from both black and white leftists, where we do see what China is doing in Africa, but they still continue to look at China as a symbol. Like they did, like they don't talk about Cuba, right, as much as they talk about China. Why is the leftist community so infatuated with China, like right now?
There's a lot of myth that we have about China. A lot of pro-black people, you even going back to Farrakhan and even a lot of modern type black, they think that they look at the Chinese economic miracle. So they were like, we could build Chinatowns and Africa can do what China did. But they ignore the millions of death. They think China was under British colonialism, and all of a sudden they decide, let's organize and be powerful. And then they organized and be powerful. They ignore the communist revolution. They ignore the Boxer Rebellion. They ignore the famines. They ignore the second cultural revolution. They ignore China's path that it took to get here. They want to skip over all that and go from colonized to liberated. And they want to go from third world country status to the second biggest economy. So they ignore the specific path that China, and I don't think that black people should or need to follow China's path, because China is not a communist country. It's an authoritarian state.
Right.
You know, and it has an authoritarian political system with a capitalistic economy. You know, so but a lot of black people, they see the hammer and sickle, they hear the communist rhetoric, but the communist rhetoric of China is akin to the democratic rhetoric of the United States. The United States says, oh, this is a democratic country. This is a country of opportunity. And if you're willing to work hard and grind and hustle and earn your leisure, then you can make it. And ignore the material reality that the vast majority of people born in this country are going to live and die in the class they're born into. This is a medieval serfdom, feudalistic type economy. And we think we're not feudalistic because instead of having rakes and hoes, we got iPhones. But it is basically a feudalistic economy run by oligarchs. And China is a authoritarian state, also run by economic, and well, we have an economic elite who run everything, but like the Soviet Union and China in this authoritarian Stalinist system, they have a political elite. So you get money through politics.
Right.
And here you get politics through money. You know?
Right.
But it's pretty much the same outcome. So China's not actually communist, because communist is the dictatorship of the proletariat. Communism, the ultimate goal of communism is a dissolution of the state. But the problem with trying to do communism is communism and socialism is oriented towards meeting the needs of the people. And warfare and perpetual ongoing conflict is anathema to socialist economic systems. So socialists are not very good at waging war. So when nations try to go socialist, they come under what is now being called siege socialism. Like, you know, if you say you're socialist and you're operating lawfully within your own nation's borders and you're following lawfully your own nation's constitution, you will still come under economic sanctions and subversion by the West.
Right.
It happened in Grenada. It's happening right now in Venezuela. It's happening right now in Brazil. It happened in Haiti with the Lava Las movement. So really, we can't go off and do socialism without revolutionary Pan-Africanism. We have to dismantle the systems and institutions of white domination, white hegemony, and capitalism, their military infrastructure, all of that. We can't simply focus on our own business.
Yeah.
That is a luxury we can't afford. Black liberation cannot coexist with Western hegemony, Western capitalism. So it is literally a fight to the death between these systems.
That's what,
according to some people.
Well, that's the last thing I wanted to ask you, and thank you again for coming on. I always appreciate your insight. Whenever we look at liberation now in 2023, and you know, obviously we were talking earlier about voting and some of the benefits of voting, but we also know we're not going to vote ourselves free, right? What does liberation look like for oppressed people in America now?
For Black people, I can't speak to. There's a lot of oppressed populations.
True. Let's say for Black people. Yeah, let's say for us.
There's no such thing as Black American liberation. Black people can only get liberated through a global because our oppression isn't local. Our oppression isn't national. If Black people in the United States were oppressed, and that oppression was isolated and separate and apart from the oppression African people experience across the globe, then we can talk about Black American liberation. But even a century ago, a generation ago, back in the 60s, there were, from Marcus Garvey to Kwame Ture, African people will not be free until Africa is free.
Right.
African people cannot be united until Africa is united.
Even Dr. King went to Ghana in 57 and built with Nkrumah.
Yes, Black people, we are members of the African diaspora. Africa was not broken apart when we were forcibly removed from our homeland. Africa was expanded. We are African people. Our disposition, our mentality, our worldview is still what they call instinctively African. We don't behave like other populations in America. And sometimes we feel ashamed for it. We ain't getting money like them. Why don't we be like these other people? So our fate has always been intimately tied to the African continent. And the African continent, the fate of the African continent is intimately tied to the fate of its diaspora. So African liberation looks like acknowledgement and unity and coordinated actions and pooled resources of African people in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. There are more African people. The place that has more Africans outside the African continent is Latin America.
Right.
And they got us talking about Latinos and Hispanics. Them are African brothers and sisters. Right. You got the Caribbean. You got Africans throughout Asia. The African diaspora has to begin to act and functions as extensions of the African continent. And we have to define the interest of African people according to how they resonate with or align with African people everywhere else. Indeed. So whether we are activists, whether we are, and other populations understand this. The United States fought a bloody war with Great Britain. They fought the Revolutionary War. Right now, there are U.S. nuclear missiles trained on London. And despite all of this animosity, World War I, World War II, U.S. soldiers suited up and went over to Europe. The United States is heavily invested in the fate of Western Europe. And they understood as Western Europe, that's why the Security Council. Why is France on the UN Security Council?
I have no idea.
That's crazy. No business. I mean, there's more people in my housing project than in the whole country of France. What natural resources, what strategic role or strategic position does France have? But the U.S. protects that role because the very warped concept of what whiteness is and who whiteness is requires that these little nowhere backwater nations, thieving parasitic nations, remain in a position of prominence, not just political and economic, but in our minds and hearts.
Right.
You can't go to a cocktail party without some Negro bragging about how they went to Paris, as if that's a flex.
Right.
But now they're going to Africa as a flex. They turning that into a flex. But like these black celebrities showing up in Africa, they are Trojan horses. And this isn't the first time. Remember when the Congo was united and the Congo was coordinating and trying to get resources to and from South Africa, and they were going to get with the armed factions of the South African anti-apartheid movement. And who did they send there? Who was the #1 recording artist at that time? Louis Armstrong.
Right.
At the same time, they carried out the CIA carried out they sent him as an emissary. People don't give, and then he even admitted, he's like, well, they used me. They used him as a distraction to take out Lumumba, and Africa still hasn't recovered from Lumumba's assassination. Yet to recover. Let me tell you something. A celebrity is not somebody who has a lot of talent. It's not somebody who's good at performing or good at athletics or somebody who's even popular. You have a lot of people that can rap better than Jay-Z, but they're never going to sell platinum. To me personally, Wise Intelligent, Boots Riley of the Coup, he's a communist. It don't matter how sick he spit his rhymes, he'll never go platinum.
Right.
It ain't about talent or lack thereof. A celebrity is a person who embodies the aspirations of the society at that time. That's why Kim Kardashian, what does she do? Can she rap?
Nah.
Can she dribble?
Nah.
And you can even say, well, she got a fat ass, but fat asses, you can buy them. Dime a dozen. That's not even a special thing to have. So when you see black celebrities, now I'm not saying black artists. We need artists.
Yes,
there is no successful revolution that did not have revolutionary art form.
Right.
Literature, music, artwork, fashion, aesthetics are very crucial to aesthetics. Liberation. There was a documentary called Revolution in 6-Part Harmony. The dance, the reemergence of the African dance and the African rituals and ceremonies was crucial from everywhere from Haiti to South Africa. So don't get me wrong. I'm not dissing artists. We can have revolutionary artists. We can have political. We can even have artists who are leaders, because there are many artists who are scholars and many scholars who are also artists. But we can't have celebrity leadership because they embody the aspirations. Jay and Bay, Even where did Obama go the day after he left the White House? He went on Richard Branson's boat, an entertainment executive.
Wow. But also too, remember during he brought all those rappers, he brought like 25 rappers into the White House to
right.
talk
So
about
and
police
it's black people looking at Michael Blackson, these minstrel performers and rappers and athletes and comedians, and like, yeah, we going back home. And I said, go there and entertain our people. Lord knows, our brothers and sisters, nobody deserves some good comedy, some good music, and some relaxations more than our brothers and sisters.
Right.
Go entertain all you can to the best of your ability. Entertain the fuck out of them, and then take your ass home.
Right.
Head on back to Beverly Hills, or Dave Chappelle can take his ass back to rural Ohio, wherever the weird place he's living with them rednecks. Then go back there and leave the struggle to the revolutionaries. And if anything, go to those people on the ground and say, how may I serve you? You talking about you go there to be the answer and to lead Africans. If anything, if you were true revolutionary artists, you go and say, how will I serve you? That's what Bob Marley did. He went to Zimbabwe. It's like, what can I do? You give me the instructions.
Right.
That's what Fela did. So that's what Paul Robeson did. So I'm not saying artists can't be a part. Artists are extremely important. We need to cultivate and support revolutionary artists. Wow. So if Skip Coon goes to Africa, then I support Skip Coon going to Africa, because I know he's going there humble and with a true black agenda in his pocket. If he could just get over that Jesus Christ nonsense he be on. But beyond that, that's a solid brother. So I'm not against entertainers going anywhere to contribute to our struggle and playing whatever role they are capable of playing within our struggle.
Right.
But I know the difference.
When you start seeing them buy up all this property and stuff out there, does that make your antennas go up?
Hell yeah. You know, everybody's bragging about Tyler Perry's studio. Now, we had already seen the record industry. And Kanye West telling us the Jews. Kanye West pay his artists. Kanye West announced he's going to give masters back to all his artists. Did he do it?
Hell no.
Hell no. Remember, he's already got a $30 million lawsuit from the gospel choir.
Yeah. He wasn't paying them.
He didn't pay them shit.
Yeah.
Used their likeness and didn't pay them shit. Look at Designer that lost his goddamn mind. Signed a good. I mean, one of my favorite rappers a decade ago in this city was Ad2.
Yeah.
Conscious, but he signed the good music. I ain't seen or heard from him since.
Wow, he did sign the good music?
Yes.
Oh man.
Common got goofy as hell. Common was one of my favorite MCs. And then after he signed the good music, he white people. Fucking everybody I like up. I was scared Dead Prez was gonna sign. So he's doing the same thing. He's not playing artists. He's ripping off artists. Barry Gordy.
Yeah, he did
Puff Daddy. Puff Daddy. Birdman.
But what's funny is
rubbing his hand together. So here's the thing. They talk, we need our black business. Talking about black business. Whatchamacallit's under federal investigation for violation of labor laws, wage theft, creating unsaid Rick Ross in his chicken spot. Guess who else is being sued and investigated?
He was doing he was doing some foul stuff.
Being a capitalist. Yeah. Being a fat black capitalist. I ain't got no problem with fat people, but it's different when it's a greedy capitalist. And you're gonna be portly and a capitalist. If you're gonna be a big bone dude, be socialist. That way you jolly like Santa Claus, giving shit away. But if you gobbling shit up, we use your fat against you. Same thing with Killer Cholesterol Mike. But guess who's in trouble else? Guess who else is in trouble for labor exploiting their workers? Slutty Vegan.
Really?
Yeah, the girl that went and gave all them Negroes LLCs. And how you go to college for 4 years and not understand somebody giving you LLC, paying your LLC application ain't no solid. Don't mean you got a business. Don't mean shit.
Right.
And like, depending on where you live, a LLC application is like $15.
Right.
You can go to LegalZoom and get a cheaper one than that.
Right.
And then, I got an LLC. Like, damn. So it's the same thing with Tyler Perry and his movie studios. He don't pay union wages. He don't conform to union work standards. Wow. He don't pay. He don't pay into the SAG system. So he's acting just like the Warner Brothers.
Right.
He's acting just like the big name movie studios. So black people getting in positions and behaving, we saw this a generation ago. We saw this we saw this with Mobutu in Congo. And we saw this Mugabe. Remember Mugabe was kicking out the white farmers?
Yep, I remember.
And then he died. He had over $3 billion in his bank account while his people were starving and being lynched in South Africa,
But we applauded him for kicking the white folks out, but
then he started talking about sissies, and he was going to kick all the gays out and give the death penalties, and saying that the British wanted to make Africa gay. But then he was a Roman Catholic to the day he died.
Wow.
And all the black kids that were molested by the Roman Catholic, he didn't kick out the church. And when a black woman who was advocating for children's rights and trying to protect African children in Zimbabwe from the Roman Catholic predators, he ran her out of the country. Mm. So just because somebody come and talk big and bad and black, race first, not race only. We need to understand class, ideology, methodology, and agenda. Mm. Race first. I'm race first. I'm not race only. Just because you black and you somewhere, that is not enough.
Right.
My solidarity is like your phone plan. It comes with terms and conditions.
Right.
So I say all that to say black capitalists, black elites who don't really exist. They're not true elites, but the prominent blacks, or as Ford called them, leading blacks. Mm. I like the term leading blacks. They are not our leaders. They are their servants. So no, I don't trust these prominent, flashy Negroes in Africa. And I'll leave you with this. Dr. John Henry Clark said, if you can't build a candy store in Harlem, you cannot run an African economy. Mm. So you can't step over the corpses of dead black kids in the United States talking about you're going to go save kids in Africa. Right. How, Sway?
Right. Wow. Man, I appreciate you, Brother Diallo.
I'm sorry. I know we're supposed to be talking about King. Rest in peace, Dr. King. I'm gonna be in DC this spring, so I'm go look at those monuments and all that mess. Maybe it'll pull
going to the museum
down.
You gonna go to the museum?
Yeah, everybody telling me I need to see it. It's really a sight to behold.
What, the African American history?
Yeah, the King Monument.
It is. It's dope. It's dope.
They got you, huh? Look at you. I see you choking back tears. They got you. They're gonna get me. Man, they're not gonna get me. I'm gonna stay hard. My heart is hard. But yeah, I'm interested. I mean, I got to do Sabo here, so I'm a little spoiled. I already got a iconic museum right in my backyard. So
right on. But I definitely, it's always a pleasure for you to come on, man.
I appreciate it. Anytime, bro.
A lot of people, like you said, that a lot of people are race first without having an understanding of everything else that comes with that. Right. And I think you do an excellent job of explaining that for everybody that may be new to my channel and haven't seen you on here before. Let them know where they can watch your shows and how they can follow you.
Yeah, Diallo Kenyatta on YouTube. I'm also producing shows and content for Black Power Media. I'm on local radio. If you live in the city of Chicago, and you can tune into the Q4 radio station, I have a weekly broadcast there, morning drive show, the Bro Diallo broadcast. You can go at Diallo Kenyatta. You're going to be finding my content. You can currently find, I'm with the Earn Your Liberation show with Dr. Jared Barr and Geechee Y'all every Friday morning. Bro Diallo radio broadcast at Diallo Kenyatta across the socials. At Diallo Kenyatta all together.
No doubt. Well, peace, and I will holler at you soon, brother.
You too. You be safe.
You too, brother.
All right, peace.
Peace.